Welcome to the Secret Resume podcast, hosted by me, Melody Moore. In this podcast, we explore the people, places and experiences that have shaped my guests, those which have influenced who they are as people and where they are in their work life today, or as I like to call it, their secret resume. Before we dive in, I want to tell you about something that I'm really excited about, which is our Being Free membership. We're developing an online community which is designed for people who are interested in personal growth. If you're navigating career transitions, maybe feeling stuck or burnt out, or simply seeking more meaning in your life, then this is for you. Membership gives you access to a range of resources, a supportive community, and monthly group coaching calls. It will allow you to explore what freedom means to you on your own terms. Head to www.liberareconsulting.co.uk/being-free to join the waitlist. My guest today is Stella Collins. Stella, lovely to see you. I'm really happy to have you here on the podcast. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Wow, gosh. I'm Stella Collins. I'm currently Chief Learning Officer and co-founder at Stella Labs. I'm the author of Neuroscience for Learning Development. And I think I'm most known for being a kind of real advocate for neuroscience, brain-based, evidence-based learning that really has an impact in the workplace. So really making sure that training, however it's done, has an impact and gets people to do the jobs they need to do, to know the things they need to know. So it's that kind of the extended learning journey, I think.
And I have just bought your book, so I'm very excited to get stuck into that because it's exactly my kind of thing. So I'm very much looking forward to reading it. So let's take a leap back in time, shall we, to, I think you said it was the early 90s we're talking about, and when you were working in IT. So let's start there, shall we?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's even earlier than that because I actually started working in IT in the 80s. So go. Yeah, I studied psychology at university and did a science psychology degree, got really interested in brains. When I left university, I didn't want to be a clinical psychologist and I didn't really want to go into research. So I was kind of left looking for something to do. And at that time, there were loads of jobs in IT. So I took a job in the world of IT, which I really quite enjoyed. I was quite surprised to find it was so enjoyable. But where it kind of starts in terms of my connections to kind of now was I started to get interested in expert systems around the kind of early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. We had a research team that were looking at that, and we were looking at how we could build those. And they were just really interesting because they're a sort of early commercial form of AI. We didn't manage to really get it going, and I don't think anybody really did. It was an opportunity to explore for people, but I just think there wasn't the technology, there wasn't the computing power at that time to do what we wanted to do. But it really raised my interest in how can we help people learn, but from a technological viewpoint. And I also did some expert systems, not expert systems, sorry, some early e-learning stuff. So it was kind of, even though I was actually working in the technical world, I was beginning to have that interest in the learning world. And I also experienced some really terrible training. I kind of had not wanted to get involved in learning really, because my experience in IT training was very poor. And I would get back to, after a 2-week-long course, this is why I'm so passionate now about making sure that learning is impactful and is worth the time and money you spend on it. Because I go for a 2-week course and then I get back and think, but how do I use that now?
Yes.
So I kind of had this theory that learning wasn't really a great experience, training wasn't a great experience. So I was a bit reluctant to move into it, but I gradually kind of shifted into training when I took a job that was called IT support and training manager. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do the training bit. I'll just do the IT support bit. I know how to do that.
I'm really curious I also studied psychology, and I'm really interested in your going from that into IT. It seems like an unusual move, but I wonder if there was anything in the psychology that you would say, I see some of that in IT, or I applied some of that in IT.
So I think one of the things was because we did this module, AI, so it was the AI of vision. I began to see that, computers weren't just, you didn't even have computers in schools, or we barely had them at university when I was there. But I began to see that there were bigger things you could do with IT, which was interesting. I literally went into it because there were jobs in it. But of course, the thing with psychology is it's an applicable everyday subject, because you meet people and you work with people every day. So every day I was using some of the things I'd learned in my psychology degree. And, now I was getting the chance to actually apply things like, how do you help people learn? How do you communicate better with people? How do you understand where people are coming from so that you can kind of, work with them better? So that's what I loved about psychology. It's such an applicable subject in
Yes.
whatever your job is, if you're working with people.
Absolutely. And you very much talk a lot about neuroscience now. How much of that was in your psychology degree?
A lot. Yeah.
Mm.
It was a science-based psychology degree at Sheffield University. And my final project was helping. It was actually a project that was published. My main published paper on the superior colliculus and its impact on Parkinson's disease.
Wow.
So, it was kind of really, we were working with animals and things. It wasn't, we weren't working with humans, but it was a very neuroscience based. We were looking at brains. We were looking at how brains work. We were looking at what different parts of the brain did. And I just found that so fascinating.
Interesting. And do you think my thought would be that there wasn't as much general interest in neuroscience then as there is now. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. And even psychology. I would say to people they've done a psychology degree and they would just leap back and say, are you going to psychoanalyze me? And I'd have to explain. No, that's not. No. And even the neuroscience, when I first started talking about kind of how you can use your brain in a business context, that wasn't a very common thing for people to really know much about. They were curious, but they didn't know much. I've really noticed, because over the last 20 years, I've probably asked the question, what do you already know about your brain? I can't remember how many times I've asked it. And when I first used to ask it, I'd get a lot of myths, huge number. Knew very little. I've got one, would sometimes be the answer. But now when I ask people what they know about their brain, people do have some decent understanding, and there are still some myths abound, but there's less of them. People are beginning to understand and know more about how their brains do work. And they're more interested. Well, they were always interested in it, but I think clearly they've got more information now. And when you've got more information, then you can start to get more curious, because you can ask better questions.
I think for me, what's changed is people's understanding of the fact that the brain can change. And even, with personality as well. I was at university in the early 90s, and, the rhetoric then was your personality is pretty fixed by the time you're 30, probably. But that's not what people believe anymore. And there's so much more understanding of, I always say you can teach an old dog new tricks. And, I think a lot of that has come from the neuroscience of understanding that the brain changes over time.
Understanding neuroplasticity and the kind of, people already knew about neuroplasticity. In the 1950s, there was quite a lot of work beginning to be done around that. It's a bit strange. And that was around kind of stroke victims very often. It's people who'd had strokes, and they began, at first it was like, you've had a stroke, hard luck, you're how you are. And then some people began to realize that no, if we work with people, they can begin to regrow those neural connections. I think that work then starts to filter out into, well, if you can regrow them after you've had a stroke, then surely you can grow them anyway. And the advent of scanning, MRI scanning, fMRI, that has really helped people understand that yes, we can really change. It's hard though to change your brain. Neuroplasticity is a complex, difficult, energy-consuming process. You can't, press a switch and it changes. You have to put the effort in, which is why learning is effortful, because you have to put the effort in to make the change.
Yes. I was listening to a podcast just the other day about dementia, because I have a personal interest. It's very prevalent in my family. And, that's what she was talking about, how actually exercise has an amazing impact on the brain and on prevention of dementia, which was fascinating to me, made me get out there and I think I need to go out and run. Yeah.
Yeah, really, it's amazing. But even gentle exercise, even if you're walking, doing yoga, any of those things. But exercise creates this neurotrophic factor, which allows you to grow brain cells, and particularly the area of your brain that's particularly kind of proactive, that's like the word, but relevant for is the hippocampus, and that can grow
Yes.
brain cells. And if you do exercise, you create this brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or you stimulate it, and that stimulates new brain cell growth. So,
Yes. That's what she was saying, that even 45 minutes twice a week or
yeah,
2 to 3 times a week is enough. And actually, the more the better. I thought she was going to say actually there was a cutoff where there was, decreasing returns, but she didn't say that. She said actually, the more you can do that, the better. And it's about getting your heart rate up and
yeah.
yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm taking us a slightly off different tack there, but it's all related. It's all about learning and developing. So you had a bad experience then of learning in IT. I was really interested in, you said, 2 weeks course. People used to do that, didn't they? They go on a long course away from the office.
Big fat dinners at night.
Yes.
Drinks.
Yes.
That was that's the training course. Everything kind of designed, go to bed late, everything designed to make you forget.
Yeah.
You'd have information thrown at you. And because I was working in IT, they were more practical than some courses, but you would always be partnered with somebody who was always quicker than me at picking up the stuff. So they complete all the exercises and I'd just be left thinking, I haven't got it.
Yes. Yeah, now we're fighting for 10 minutes with people. But I remember doing leadership programs where people would easily go away for 5 days. They wouldn't think anything of it. People didn't have mobile phones, or very few people did. So no one was getting called all of the time. It was completely different to today. So you had your experiences of training in IT, positive, negative. You went to the CIPD and had I was going to say a Damascus moment, but you had an interesting experience there that kind of led you down a different path. Do you want to talk about that?
So I had this role that was the IT support and training manager, but I didn't really want to have much to do with the training. I'd taken on an inspirational trainer and I thought, well, she can do most of that. I was beginning to learn from her, but I thought I should at least, attend a conference or start to find out something. The IPD conference. Lots of grey suits, lots of kind of quite dull stands. It was when CIPD was still very HR orientated. And there was a big pirate ship full of pirates. I thought, well, that's pretty innovative and useful. I kind of just was drawn by curiosity and went on board. Found out that they were trainers and they were using what was called accelerated learning to train financial skills. And I thought, well, if you can use that to train financial skills, you must be able to use it to train IT skills. And for a long time, what I'd wanted to do was kind of do something with IT skills, try to change them. So basically, they were actually looking for associates. So I it was about the time I was ready to quit the job I was in anyway. So I quit the job, became a freelance trainer, went and joined them, began to learn a lot. Their company didn't actually last for that long, but I got really interested in accelerated learning, which was based on an evidence base. I mean, I've adapted it since, to kind of add more of the science in, but it had an evidence base and it was just incredibly practical and work.
And talk about accelerated learning, because it was a term that was around a while ago now, and I don't hear people talk about it very much. I remember being in love with it. I thought it was a fabulous idea and applying a lot of it. But just say what it means to you.
So I think what it meant to me was switching. Sometimes it's called flipped classroom, things like that now. It's about making sure that the learner does the work, because it's their brains, their bodies that have to change. They have to make new habits. They have to build new memories. And it was much more about what can we do to create an environment in which people do things, rather than an environment where we lecture at people or it's not quite relevant to them. Immediacy was important, but it was relevant, that it was in context, that it was, something they needed right now. And that it was exploratory, but still guided. So it wasn't quite like some of the exploratory stuff where you just randomly wander and find things. It was guided, you had a purpose, very outcome orientated. What's that was the question, what do you want people to be able to do? And then how can we go about helping people do it? I think one of the big challenges accelerated learning had was the name.
Ah.
And it came, I think, from language learning originally. I think that was where it was first sort of initiated, as far as I know. And this accelerated learning, I think, in a business context, people just thought, well, people are going to be able to learn faster.
Ah.
And in the business context, that meant so we can go from 2 weeks to,
2 days.
That's not the purpose. What it meant was that people would learn better, and you do accelerate the learning process. But what it didn't kind of explain was the learning process is long anyway.
Yes. Yes. And it's interesting then you say that people they like things like flipped classroom. They're all just evolutions of that idea of, I mean, it seems crazy to think of that now, that was a radical idea that people had to actually do something in order to learn.
People have still not necessarily got that.
No.
They might do it, but it's not happening.
No. One of the challenges I think is that I notice is that people get sort of, it's the word flipped that made me think of it, flipped into that idea of a classroom, and they get taken back to their school days. And so they have an expectation of that particular style of learning where they're told and they write things down. And it's almost like a holiday to go on a training course because you're not having to actually do anything. But also our evaluation techniques also reinforce that, because we ask people basically to critique a program. We don't ask them what role they played in that learning. So there's something the power balance is wrong for me.
We ask them at the wrong time because as soon as they've finished, an event, when they've had a holiday, they've probably been fed well, it was a break from normal work. And so, they think, that was quite good. And also they've never not necessarily experienced, consciously or formally experienced better ways of learning. So they think, well, that was good. That seemed, the lecture was quite interesting. The trainer was interesting. They asked us a few questions, it was good. But we ask them just as they're leaving. We don't ask them 3 months later when they're back in the workplace, what are you now doing that's different that you learned in that training course?
Yes.
And that's when we should ask.
Yes.
And get proof of that as well.
Yes.
And be involving, people's managers, peers, customers. Well, have you noticed that there's been a change here? I mean, for some things it's, sales, it's kind of obvious. But, there's lots of tasks people do at work that is not, it's harder to track that, but that's what we should be asking. That's what we should be testing.
Yes. And you said to me earlier that you do training impact assessments. Is that the right phrase? Is that the
impact audits? So.
There we go. Training impact audits or training audits. Is that the kind of thing you're doing when you do those?
Yeah, we're looking at, for a start, have you got any outcomes in the first place, and what are your outcomes like? And are the outcomes what we call transfer outcomes? Have you decided what you want people to be able to do? Because if you know what you want people to do, then you can measure, are they doing it now? How are they doing it now? Are they doing it later, and how are they doing it later? So that's the first thing to kind of ask. And then we start looking, and it depends on kind of the level of audit we're doing, but we can look at it from a kind of a bigger cultural level. Have you got, I think whatever we do, we always ask, have you got a strong learning framework in place? Do you have an evidence-based framework that goes across your entire learning environment that says, this is how people learn? And very few organizations have that. They've picked a bit here, they've picked a bit there. And some people don't have no framework at all. And I think that's really important. And it needs to be an evidence-based framework. You need to know how, in order to help people learn, you need to know how they learn. You were just talking about the kind of the power dynamics of it, and leaving learners without the skill of learning.
Yes.
Why would anybody who works in IT or accountancy, why would they know how their brains learn? Of course they don't know that, and they don't really need to know that. But if you give them some insights into, and you can do it through very simple things, you give them some insights into, how you really learn as opposed to how you've learned so far at work. Most people have learned more on the job because that's where they do the practical doing stuff.
Yes.
That's from training courses. So yeah, we look at that kind of framework. we look at the processes. Are the processes supporting people to put their whatever they've learned in the formal pieces to put that into practice? Are there, support people? Have they got coaches? Have they got managers who support the training? Is the environment when they go back to work actually conducive, offering them opportunities to practice?
Yeah.
Because they still need to practice. Just because you went on a training course doesn't mean you came back as an expert. You're just a newbie.
Yeah.
So it's that whole environmental thing. So we look at all those things and kind of talk about, what organization, everybody's doing something well. So we don't start with you're doing it all wrong. We always start with this is good. This is great. Do lots more of this. Stop doing this, whatever it is. And if it's, if all they're doing is content delivery, we'll stop just doing content delivery. You can still deliver content, but make sure that people are able to pick that content up and use it and take it further than just the content. And then, there's some stuff that we say, you do need to start doing some new stuff.
Yes. Yes. Some of the most impactful learning I've done as a facilitator, as a consultant, is where we've very actively got the managers involved. And what was really striking for me was obviously it had a really positive impact on the participants, but actually it was almost training by stealth for the managers.
Yeah.
And some of the managers, in fact, all of the feedback we got from the managers was as positive as from the participants. And I had managers say to me, I took this thing that you gave me to do with my participant and I used it on myself. They used it to think about their own career. And I've used it with all of my team as well. So there was this amazing byproduct of getting them more involved and actually stealthily teaching them how to be a better manager, certainly around development and development conversations, but they mentally thought they were going there because of their participant.
But I think it's really important that we recognise for managers, they've got huge pressures. They've got pressures from above. They've got pressures from below. They're really squashed. They have a tough time, I think. And if you're, enthusiastic, kind of ambitious young employee has just gone on a course about AI and you know nothing about AI, that's slightly threatening because you've either got to say, I know nothing about AI, teach me, which is a great thing to do.
Yes.
Or, which is more likely, I haven't really got time to find out what you're doing. Or they're actually feeling threatened and they think, well, I don't want them to do anything more because, I'm threatened. My role is threatened here. So actually, I don't really want them even to. I'm not saying they do this consciously, but I think there's that fear of I'm going to look like I don't know what somebody who's more junior than me knows, and therefore that threatens my role as a manager.
Yes. If their self-image of a manager is someone who is an expert in everything that they manage, it can be absolutely can be challenging for them. If their image of a manager is that they shouldn't know everything,
then that's much better.
Yeah,
I
much
think
more comfortable.
A lot of managers, they're not given the support they need, the appropriate training they need to help them realize that your job as a manager. I can still remember I was given this training support and IT support and training manager role, and I thought I had to know everything. So I did employ people. No, I didn't. No, I didn't at first. At first, I was trying to do everything, only not the training. I was just ignoring it. And one day I went to my manager and I said, who was the MD, I said, I'm really struggling here. I can't do everything. He said, I've been waiting for you to come and say that. He said, I think I need some people. He said, yes, that's exactly what you need. Delegate to. And I thought, oh, yeah. But he could have accelerated that process by giving me that information, by helping me with that earlier on in the process.
He was clearly of the you need to learn it for yourself perspective. So you engaged with the pirates. You worked as an associate for them. They weren't around forever. You then carried on working for yourself, presumably. And you are going to talk about someone called Anne Grindrod. Am I saying that correctly? Grindrod. Yes, I missed out the R. I wasn't looking. So tell me about why she was so important.
So she was I met through this company. She was also an associate working.
Okay.
And we got on very well. I mean, I got on well with everybody I met in that station. But she had a big project coming up in government departments, and she was looking for some people to work with her. So she was looking for kind of associates, but she didn't want to be, she wanted collaborators rather than associates. So we just began to work together on some projects, mostly in government departments. I just learned so much from her. And I think she learned quite a lot from me too, because she was a really experienced trainer. She cared so much for people. She was incredibly caring and very professional, very organized, very reflective, analytical and reflective. So I learned a lot from her. And one of the things we did was project where we went around the country for about 3 months doing these bite-sized sessions. This particular government department had decided they wanted to just upskill everybody, but just with little, nuggets of things. So we used to do these 2-hour bite-sized, you might have been 2.5, 3 hours, bite-sized sessions. We'd do 3 a day. Yes, it must have been 2 hours, 3 a day. And usually you were doing different ones each day. But it meant it was like the perfect apprenticeship for somebody who was relatively new to actually designing and delivering training. Because I had to go in every day and kind of give the initial setup spiel. And we had it really well planned. So, we did introductions. We got people to think about what approach they wanted to take. But we had to accelerate all these things that you would do in a longer training course. We had to accelerate it so that we still had the psychological safety that we needed to run these short courses, but we kind of accelerated it. So it was really good learning what's the minimum you can do for the maximum impact. And I just learned so much from her enthusiasm, her ability to give really good feedback. She was very good at sort of saying, this was fantastic, but this is what needs to change. And we worked together for a long time.
And what did you focus on? I'm interested in this rapid creation of psychological safety. What were the kinds of things you were doing?
To create psychological, we would do things. They were such simple things. When people arrived, before they arrived, we'd set everything up. So they walked into a room that looked welcoming, warm. We used to really think about what's the room setup we want. So we never had boardroom tables. We never had horseshoe tables. We got rid of tables as much as we could. But if we did have tables, they would be sort of circular tables with people sitting kind of collaborating. We thought about the room layout. So when they walked in, they felt welcome. We had posters. We'd just create like flip charts that said welcome. And we'd write everybody's name on them. So they walked, see their names. As they walked in, we were there to greet them. And I've been to plenty of training courses where you walk in and you think, who's the trainer here? Anne had worked a lot with people who were struggling to get work. And she said, always, greet people and shake their hands and look them in the eyes. You learn a lot from that. So we would very deliberately greet them as if they were, an honored guest. And then we had it immediately. So instead of that going to sit down and kind of be looking around quietly, we had an exercise immediately for them to do that paired them up with other people. So they immediately had a kind of somebody else to buddy with. And then, whereas in a long course, we'd have done that thing of, well, how would we all like to work together? What would you like to do? What do we expect from you? We took the ideas that were pretty much always the same. And we just said, look, these are what, and we used to present them we used to present them as laminates. We didn't even have PowerPoints out at this point. We would sometimes use PowerPoint. We would present them as laminates and say, these are the things people ask for, that we're listened to, that everybody listens to everybody else, that we can ask questions when we want. Does that all work? Yes, let's agree. And then we just put them up as posters on the wall. So people could see that that psychological agreement was up and visible. And then we would really quickly initiate conversations with people. So instead of it being us talking, it would be, so what do you want to get out of this session? We know what we've been sent to give you. So that we already had them saying, well, they knew what they were coming for. It was time management or did one, feel the fear and do it anyway. And lots of decision making, things like that. It was kind of like small, business type activities. And so we'd ask them what they wanted to get out of it. So they were immediately thinking for themselves, well, okay, so there is something in it for me. It's not just I've been sent. But all those things, I think, inspired to have people feel quite open. We used to get, in 2 hours, we used to get some very interesting insights from people and often come back to us and share with us quite difficult things sometimes.
Yeah. It's remarkable how much you can achieve, isn't it? I've done a developmental trauma training, 3-year training, and we have done lots of practice sessions, and a typical session would be an hour, but actually we were practicing 10-minute sessions, 20-minute sessions, 30-minute sessions, and it's remarkable. Now, admittedly, we were working with each other, and you've got that psychological safety already there, but it was remarkable how even in a 10-minute session you could do something really meaningful.
And you can do it too. So, I would still if I'm running a digital session, I still do that same personal, building that psychological safety at the beginning, building the trust at the beginning. Sometimes revealing something, not life's deepest secret, but just revealing something personal about you. Gosh, I had a terrible trip to work today because I fell over and tripped. Or, being human.
I liked what you said as well about the apprenticeship, because I'm a firm believer in a lot of repetition. That's how you really, I guess it's this idea of 10,000 hours, that's how you become really good at something, is you practice a lot. And I've seen, former colleagues who get bored doing something too often and kind of zip off and do something else. But actually, for me, I work for a small consultancy initially, and we did a lot of the same thing, but God, you got good at it.
And for me, yes, it was the same topic every day, but it was always different people. So that's different because they were the input as much as we were.
Yeah,
it was always different. The only challenge I used to have was we used to do a memory session, how to improve your memory. And if you did 3 of those in a day, about halfway through the second session, you'd think, have I already said this? Another group? I'm not quite sure. And I'd usually admit to it and say, have I already told you this or not?
It was a test of your memory. Yeah. Love that. So a huge amount. What do you think she learned from you? You said you learned a lot from her. What do you think she was learning from you?
She learned a lot of science from me. So she didn't have a science background. So I think she got much more interested in the science that she was already interested in the brain, but she learned science from me. I think she learned some creativity from me. I would kind of instigate things that perhaps she wouldn't have thought of on her own, but we were creative together, I think. And I think she learned that she was a very controlled sort of person and everything had to be planned and strategized. And I know a really good example is as we were doing this, for some reason, I have no idea, I can't remember why now, but I decided I wanted to write an article for Training Journal. I think maybe they were asking for articles, and I thought, well, I could write an article. And she said to me, how can you write an article? What makes you qualified to write an article for a prestigious publication? I said, well, I can write. I know about the topic. I can do it. And I think that was one of the things. She said, oh, okay. You don't have to be absolutely perfect all the time. You can have a go.
Yes. Amazing. So one of the things, and I guess this crosses over probably different time periods in your life, is you've lived abroad a lot. You currently live abroad. Well, abroad to me. It's not abroad to you, is it now? But you lived in lots of different places, and you said that's a really core part of who you are and has influenced you. Do you want to tell us about that?
So as a child, even as a young adult, I did not leave the UK until I was 20, and I went to France on a hitchhiking holiday with my boyfriend who became my husband. So I'd never we went on holiday to Wales, so I'd never been abroad. And when we first sort of set up a home, family, what have you, I had no intention necessarily of living abroad. It wasn't something that interested us. But as we kind of done all the standard things, go to university, get a job, have children, or get married, have children, get another job, we just began to think, we need to do something different. And we just decided together that we fancied living abroad. So we planned and went and lived in New Zealand for 4 years, which with our 2 small children, which was just a huge change, a huge shift, incredibly exciting, really uplifting. And I think from that, what we learned was, if you want to do something and plan it, you can. That idea of, if I say I'm going to do it, then people hold me to it, and they seem to believe it more than I believe it. That was that kind of, whoa, this is a bit, people really think I'm going to live in New Zealand. So I think, and then the ability to adapt and be resilient when, things aren't quite like you were expecting. It's life. like, and then we eventually came back from there, which also was a learning. There was learning from that too, because then you learn that you can see the progress you've made in life because you've had a sort of a gap. It's given you a shift. So you see that, oh, actually, I've changed in that time. My friends are still kind of doing the same things, and actually, I do things differently now. That kind of thing. And then, then we moved to Spain because we wanted to.
Why did you go to New Zealand? Why New Zealand of all places?
We didn't speak any other languages, so we thought we had to go to an English country. We didn't really fancy America. We thought Canada might be a bit cold. My husband was working for an Australian company at the time and didn't want to work with any more Australians. I mean, just terrible kind of, random. We didn't really know because you couldn't search the internet in those days to find these things.
No.
So it was just based on a hunch, really. And we just thought New Zealand seemed like a nice place.
And what made you come back? Or rather, you went to Spain, but what made you come back from the other side of the world?
Ties with home and family, ties with family and old friends. We made a lot of new friends in New Zealand, but ties, I think. And the fact that New Zealand is so far away from the rest of the world. It's a very young country, so there was no history. There was no. It has a culture, but it's it's quite a short-lived culture, and we just missed the kind of we missed history, we missed family, and we missed being able to easily go. In Britain, you can go to Europe. Well, you used to be able to go to Europe really easily. It got harder. You can get to Europe very easily and very quickly. Even in Britain, we have our own cultures. Wales, England, Ireland, Scotland.
Yes,
different cultures. Whereas that wasn't the case in New Zealand. It was a great culture, but we kind of done it, I think. So fantastic place.
Yes, I've never been and I really want to go. It's definitely on my list of places I'd like to go. The thought of the long flight though, just...
It is
Then you went to Spain. You said you went there just because you wanted to? You didn't speak Spanish or you did?
We did. We didn't go to Spain straight away. So we came back to the UK, and we were in the UK probably, our kids went through senior school and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to Spain basically because our kids had grown up. They didn't need us on an everyday basis. They were starting to buy their own houses, things like that. And we just thought we're ready for an adventure again. We'd been to Spain a lot. My husband had worked in this particular, we moved to a city called Burgos in northern Spain. He worked there. We both kind of fell in love with it. And we just thought, I think it was partly because of Brexit, whilst we can still go easily without having to apply for the, let's take an opportunity and go and do it. I was already starting to work a bit digitally. I'd worked at home office for years and years and years, and digital learning was beginning to start to be something. So I knew that I could probably run my business and start to run some digital training.
And now you're in Belgium.
Now we're
in right?
Yes, because whilst working in Spain, I had a client in Belgium, so I did a learning audit for him, and then we got some training for his team, and we got talking, and basically, long story short, we decided to form a business together. He's very entrepreneurial. I valued his entrepreneurial skills.
Mm-hmm.
Always wanted the opportunity to grow a business a bit quicker than mine had evolved. Mine was, nice, slow growth associate model. I wanted something more exciting, and so but he was in Belgium and had an office and things like that we could use. So it seemed sensible to move to Belgium. COVID hit, so it didn't really matter where I lived. Yeah, I could have stayed in Spain, but COVID hit, and we grew the business.
Amazing. I thought you were going to say it's because of the chocolate, but
yes, the chocolate are obviously big incentives.
That's a reason to stay. And what do you think, if we think about your career and learning as a topic, what do you think living in those different countries has taught you about learning? Something
I kind of already knew, but it's even clearer, is that the process of learning is very similar, certainly within the European-based countries I've lived in. What goes on in people's brains is similar. So in terms of learning, that people resist change, and change is difficult. But when encouraged to see the value of change, then people can do it. And that sometimes things are difficult and challenging and complex, but you can learn from them. And I think one of the things I've really learned, and that I have a lot of kind of expat friends here in Belgium from all around the world, And one of the things we all talk about is once you've learned something, it's really hard to go back. So once you've been and lived in another country, you can go back to your home country. We did. We went back to the UK for quite a lot of years, but you're never the same. You
Mm.
you've changed, and I think you've changed more than the people who stayed and didn't. You have more experiences. Your life is enriched.
Mm.
Just going to the end of the street is a very different experience to what you have when you live in your hometown or an English town that you're used to or British town that you're used to living in.
I lived in Canada. You're right. It was cold for a couple of years. And yeah, I feel that it was a really important part of my career as well as my life experience, even though what I was doing there was nothing from a sort of progression status perspective, but just learning how different organizations did things. I learned a huge amount. It was interesting.
And I think the one thing that I've really, really learned, and this is I'm not sure, is it Madagascar or something? People's is people's. Wherever you go in the world, people, they're not the same. Of course, they're not the same, but people want to work, want to meet people, want to socialize, want to learn. People do want to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw, it was ages ago now, there was, what's he called? The guy who owns Headspace, Andy something. He put on Twitter, I think it was, I think he thought it was profound. He said, what have you learnt today? The implication being that people haven't learnt. And my response is, surely everybody learns every single day. I can't think of a day that I've had that I haven't learnt something.
But I think there's a difference about whether you're conscious about your learning or unconscious about your learning. So many things unconsciously, habits that we pick up, whether they're good. We're not aware we're learning them. I've just had a brand new granddaughter. She's absolutely wonderful.
Congratulations.
And she's already, and I was there with them for 10 days. In the 10 days, she began to learn she learned to feed. She began to learn the difference between kind of night and day. In the day I come downstairs and there seems to be quite a lot of light and buzziness, and then at night it's quite dark. And I still get fed, but it seems different. In 10 days she's learned that, but she's not consciously learning that. That's what she's learning. And I think those habits and, reactions to people, some of our personality traits, we learn them without being conscious of learning them. And I think that's why conscious learning and understanding how learning happens is important, because if you see yourself repeatedly doing something, you can think to yourself, I'm learning this pattern and maybe I don't want to learn this pattern. Maybe I'll shift this pattern.
Yes.
So maybe that's what he was talking about, the kind of...
Yeah, maybe. Yes. I think you're right though. And I think a lot of things that we do, we don't realize are learned. That's one of the things that the developmental trauma therapy has taught me, is how much of what we think is really part and parcel of us are things that we learned when we were really young. And we think it's part of our personality, but often it's not. It's just we learned that was the right way to behave.
One of the things that's underestimated in terms of behavior is the environment and our ability to kind of accept and conform to the environment we see in front of us. And that's how people like Derren Brown managed to, trick people and convince people.
Oh, amazing. Yes.
That, amazing kind of psychological environment, but a physical environment as well. For instance, you don't go into your average canteen and dance on the tables. But if you're at the Hofbrauhaus in the Munich Beer Festival, that's what you do. You dance on the tables. And it's that kind of the environment shifted and makes it perfectly acceptable to do. And there's quite a lot of interesting research around how our personalities are certainly influenced by the environment we find ourselves in and what other people around us are doing.
Yes. And I think that's sometimes why you hear people say they are a different person at home and at work. And, I've seen people who are, you can be different from meeting to meeting because it's who you're interacting with that causes that. And I think how that works the other way is a lot of leaders that I meet don't realize that they're causing the behaviors in their team. So they are perhaps making them feel anxious, and that's affecting their nervous system, which is then affecting their ability to think sensibly. And so they're creating and they don't realize they're doing it, they're creating an environment where people cannot perform at their best.
And that's why I talked about at the beginning, going into a training room and looking at it and assessing, is this training room reinforcing that school environment, or is it enabling people to feel like we're part of this? So, even things like, one of the things I used to do was put the PowerPoint at the back of the room. So instead of it front, put it at the back or the side or somewhere, so that it wasn't the full focus of everything. It wasn't like a huge difference that made people feel uncomfortable, but it was just something that shifted the thinking in the room. And I think it's those, and with managers, they usually sit at the top end of the table.
Yes.
If you've got that sort of table.
Yes. And it creates something. Yes.
Which can create a more balanced feeling there, because everybody has the same size square.
Yes, that's true. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, absolutely.
Research on that too.
Oh, really? Oh, how interesting. So tell me, we'll come to your final person in a moment, but I'm really curious as to how you think training has evolved, perhaps for the better and maybe for the worse over the years that you've been involved.
So I think the advent of really blended learning, where now we can really harness, the technology and the ability to come together and to collaborate, whether we do that face to face or whether we do that digitally. I think that is a big benefit. I think that's really helped. That's not to say we don't still want face to face training, because I think there's a reason for having that too. And that's, about human connectedness. We do still connect better, I think, when we're face to face. May change as we grow to be more. I think where the challenges, and of course I can't not mention it, can I? AI is really going to shift that ability for people to learn for themselves, so long as they understand enough to be able to critique what the AI is showing them. So I think the challenge we have is that, if AI can tell you anything, but of course, if you haven't got any background knowledge, you can't validate whether what it's telling you is correct or not. So you're having to look for, you need to look for multiple sources. You need to be able to critique it, which is why people are talking about, it will improve it could improve critical thinking.
Yes.
Teach people to think critically.
Yes.
So I think AI is going to have a positive impact. I think it's bringing back that ability to just ask the question at the moment you need it, with a form of learning, if you can retain and use the answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's just-in-time learning has been a phrase that's been around for a long time.
And I think where we're challenged is, I think we'll make this work, is the advent of, the LMS with all this content, all this information. I can see where that came from. Yes, it's great to give people free access to stuff, but it's completely overwhelming. People don't know what to choose. And once they've chosen it, what do they do with it then? It doesn't, we were talking about practice, the value of practice. You can't learn something just by watching. I mean, I always ask people, how did you learn to ride a bike? Nobody learns to ride a bike by reading a book, watching a video, or doing a piece of e-learning. You have to do it. And that's the same with any skill, any behavior you learn. You have to do it. You can get information.
Yes.
Unless you use that information, you use it to start making decisions. You use it in some way. It's just information.
Yes.
So that is one of the disadvantages. And AI could make that worse, because of course it's now really generate tons more content, validated or not. And I think what we need to use AI is to do the things that are harder for people to do. AI coaches, I think those can be really valuable to support people to put their learning into practice in the workplace and reflection. But then they have to be nudged to ask those questions, or the AI has to nudge them in some way.
Yeah, and I think, one thing I've really noticed recently is how much better chatbots have got. I've had chatbot conversations with a chatbot that have actually been better than a conversation with an individual, because they got me the answer I wanted instantly, which was really helpful. But I've also had experience with AI of hallucinations, as I learned is what it's called. I was asking ChatGPT to summarize actually some podcasts, and it made up quotes. They weren't real quotes. They sounded very plausible, but I was reading them thinking, I don't remember that person saying that, and they didn't. They said something similar, but it wasn't exactly, and it was giving them to me as quotes. And I thought, gosh, that was a real sort of aha moment for me, that you've got to be really careful.
I had quite a long conversation with ChatGPT saying, please stop referring learning styles. I asked it what it knew about the myth of learning styles, and it knows that too. So I asked it to start using, the myth of learning styles so that it doesn't present me with learning styles. I haven't gone back in yet to see whether it has actually learned that or whether it still will just present me with learning styles.
Yeah, it's yeah. There's a caution, a big caution. What's the triangle on it for me? I love AI, but I think yes, we need to be aware of its fallibility as well. So, talk to me about your final person, which is Don Taylor. Tell me a bit about him.
I don't know if he knows how much he's done, but to really help me work on kind of speaking slots. So I would bump into Don when I first started speaking at conferences and events. I would bump into him, and he was just this big person who I didn't know, and he was quite sort of grand, and I thought he was very important. But he would always stop to speak and say, how did your session go? Or good luck for your session, or I know you're going to, blast it out the park. He was always very constructive and helpful. And then he started inviting me to speak and for help at to learning technologies and things like that. And just whenever I have something I need to talk through, and he's a very busy man, so I try really hard not to pester him. But he's very willing and able to give, and he's very supportive. For me, he's really, really helped me build my speaking kind of role, my conference speaking role. So I just have to thank him for that. And he's very inspirational in that.
Fantastic. And that leads us nicely on to my question about what's next for you. Speaking is part of that. So what's next?
I appreciate speaking slots, kind of keynotes and things they're eye-openers. They're not solid pieces of learning. But I think if I can get more people excited about trying to understand more about the brain, then maybe they'll come back to me and ask me to really give them, some support in terms of helping them understand how their brains work and improve the learning that happens in their organization. But yeah, if I can do more of that, that's something I'm really interested in. I'm always aiming towards that learning impact. So I'm trying to, I suppose, perhaps challenge people's assumptions a little bit around what they think learning might be, and try and get them to think about learning it's an effortful thing. It takes time. It takes the practice. And that as humans, we're very good at learning, but we kind of need to get back into learning the way we're naturally good at, and away from the kind of learning as it has been done in the last 10, 15 years, where it's, well, probably, through the education system as well. It's been a little bit kind of sage on the stage. And I'm asking to be a sage on the stage at the same time, to remain a guide on the side. So yeah, I think, and I want to discover more. I really, really like to learn more. So I really want to see, how can we use AI to help people? But I really want to bring together that kind of, I talk about the intersection of kind of neuroscience, people, and AI, all working towards supporting performance, supporting productivity, and helping people feel that when they spend time learning, that it's valuable and useful.
And that's that impact that you were talking about, making sure it's related to performance rather than just learning for learning's sake.
Learning for learning's sake outside of work, absolutely lovely. You can learn to paint, you can learn to ski, you can learn to do anything you like. It's absolutely lovely. But I think in the work context, it has to be relevant. Otherwise, people feel they're wasting their time, money, energy, and that, and it loses goodwill. I think that's a trend. Learning is so vital to handling and dealing with change.
I think this reminds me of something you were talking about earlier about learning outcomes and how that is involved in the audit that you do. And I would say that many of my clients don't really know why they're asking somebody to learn or for the particular piece of, their actual clarity on outcomes is not good often. And, then we evaluate programs against some outcomes that weren't very good in the first place because they've not been, enough time has been spent on them.
One thing I really loved about what we developed with the AI part of our platform was it suggests really structured, transfer-oriented, behavioral-driven outcomes that you can then experiment with and explore. You can kind of discuss with relevant stakeholders and say, is this what you're trying to achieve? So it can help give people a feeling for, okay, that's kind of where we're aiming for. So it's good at giving a structure, a framework, and even some ideas. And with that, because it's really hard to start developing outcomes if you don't really know where you're going. So if you get given some examples, if you say this one works, can we just tweak that one? And that's entirely possible. I think that's really important to help people make suggestions for sensible outcomes, but just to keep asking questions. What do you want people to be able to do by the end of this? To feel.
Yes, absolutely. And what about books? You've got some of your own books in the pipeline. It sounds like it, certainly in your brain, if not on paper, that are coming up. What about other books that you would recommend?
One I read, followed up on, and become quite a good friend with is Ina Weinbar-Heidel. She wrote a book called What Makes Training Really Work. And she talks about the 12 transfer levers. So it's really about how do you help people make that transfer from in or formal learning into work-based learning, actually making sure they achieve their goals. So that's a really good one. And then one I read just last year, and I absolutely love it. It's The Extended Mind, The Power of Thinking Outside the Brain by Annie Murphy-Paul. She's she's a journalist, a science journalist rather than a trainer. But it's all about kind of, the connection between our brains and bodies, and some of the things we've already talked about in terms of how the environment impacts on what you think and what you do, and some of the things like how our gut is linked very strongly to our brains. Fascinating book, and and it's very practical. There's some really practical insights as to what you can do. When thinking with natural spaces, and it's very practical about what you can actually do to really help people to use their brains in the best way and to kind of understand their brain.
And what about a title for your story?
I like alliteration, so that's how kind of words that went together. A wandering wander through the world. I've had things that I've done because I planned to do, and then I've taken opportunities when they've arrived, and always through that sense of curiosity. And I wonder what that would be like. So a wandering wander through the world.
A wandering wander through the world. You just wanted to make it hard for people to say. It's like a tongue twister. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I found this absolutely fascinating. It's been really interesting hearing your story, but I'm just also really fascinated in your views and your expertise and experience. So I'm sure listeners will be equally fascinated. So thank you very much for your time. This podcast is brought to you by Liberare Consulting. If you enjoyed today's show, why not click on the subscribe button so you are among the first to hear about new episodes? And we would love for you to do us a favour and click on the share button and share this episode with one of your friends.